Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this webinar on the topic of high-performance, cost-effective move to Azure. My name is Kwok, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined by a couple of esteemed Unravelers. We've got Floyd Smith, who is our Product Marketing Director, and Mick Nolan, who is our Senior Solutions Engineer. Welcome. Hello, how are you guys today?
Hello. Great. Thanks, Kwok.
Yep, doing great.
Fantastic. Just before we start, here are some quick housekeeping rules. If you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the questions box below, type in your question, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Or if you are watching on demand, we'll answer them via email reply. This webinar is available instantly on demand, so if you do have to drop off, feel free to come back to this page and listen at your leisure. Let us know what you think about this session by rating this webinar and letting us know if there's any other topics or feedback you'd like to give. Without further ado, I'm now going to hand off to Floyd. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all around the world. Global webinars, and we're not doing events in most places right now, so this is live online. And we're here to talk today about high-performance, cost-effective move to Azure. Now, we've talked before about general move to cloud in a previous webinar, and also moving to AWS. So the focus today is the general framework for moving specifically to Azure and how that works with Unravel, how Unravel supports that process. And we set out a process that you can use with your teams. So whatever your specific role is, you may be more in a planning role, you may be about execution, you may be in development and worrying about the code that you've got running on premises and is it going to run in the cloud? Well, for all of those roles, this framework will help you interconnect, do your work, and interface well with the other people working with you to get this done. Our CDO and VP of Engineering, Sandeep, actually led such a move in a previous role with megabytes and megabytes of data for a company. You'll see it if you look on his LinkedIn, major accounting company, and they moved tons of data in a similar move years ago. So we've been through this individually and of course many times with our customers. And so our first presenter is Mick. I'll let him say a little more when we get there, but let's just get a quick introduction from Mick now.
Hey, thanks, Floyd. Mick Nolan, Senior Solutions Engineer here with Unravel, and I work with a lot of our customers to really, help them through that transition and make it successful, before, during, and after. Yes,
yes. And I'm Floyd Smith, the new Director of Product Marketing. Got the selfie going there. And I've worked here for about 6 months, which is usually about the amount of time it takes to get fully immersed at a new tech company here in Silicon Valley, speaking of that more as a state of mind than as a specific place, since people are spread out these days. And I'll share a little bit more as we go along. So first of all, Unravel. Startups are great because they bring new technology, but people think, oh, it's a new company. Should I trust them? Should I work with them? Well, we have a very experienced team. That Apple in the logos there is mine, along with a couple others. Our market adoption is really strong. We tend to sell to larger companies, although we have a number of medium-sized companies working with us as well. Our main focus is what's usually called big data and streaming data, and that tends to be a kind of project that you have at a large company. Very broad technology coverage. We're proud of all the logos here, and specifically, we're very proud to be partnered with both AWS and the Microsoft Azure teams around what we're going to be talking today, moving to cloud. And Mick and I were talking a little bit just before we went live, that when I talk about moving to cloud, that moving is reality for a lot of people. If you're actually doing it, and as I said, we've got several veterans of doing it on our team, congratulations, and we're here to help. However, many people come to webinars like this one to get their minds around the process and see if a given tool can help support them, because it's in the near future for them. I was joking that many years ago, it was the year of the network for a long time before everyone actually was networked. So we're moving to cloud during this decade, and by the end of the decade, most people will have most of their stuff in the cloud. At the beginning, a lot of established shops are still on premises. So if you're looking to learn, if you're in the throes of it and need some help right now, we're here for you. If you're looking a bit ahead and trying to figure out what tools and assets you can bring to bear, we're here for that too. And Unravel Data is a force multiplier. Now, the process I'm talking about applies for moving to cloud, whether you use the specific technologies we support or not. So feel free to hang in there if you're looking at this as a more general issue. But the specific technologies we currently support are around big data, and we're extending to other data technologies that also move tons of data. But big data specifically refers to these technologies on premises, people using Hadoop, Cloudera, Impala, Hive, Spark, Kafka. We'll show some more technologies, but those are the core ones we usually work with. We especially have a good time when people are heavy users of Spark, because it's a wonderful tool and it gets asked to do a tremendous amount, and therefore it has problems. Monitoring for it is not optimal, and we fill a real gap there. We also fill a real gap in moving to the cloud. So the technologies that people tend to use us to move to, AWS EMR, Azure HDInsights, but also on both platforms, Databricks is a big target. To oversimplify a bit, EMR and HDInsights tend to support people on a lift and shift basis. So you take what you're already running on premises, you don't change it much, and you run it in the cloud. That's the easier move to do, but it may not be as efficient once you get there. Usually, if you move to Databricks, you're doing more re-engineering on the way in, but then you have more control when you're there. So that's the trade-off. Do you do the work up front? And it takes longer and it's more expensive and more head scratching, but it may work better and your cost might be better when you get there. Or do you just lift and shift what you've got? Easier process, but do you have as much control, and are you getting the most out of the platform once you've moved? Also work with Google Cloud Platform, and we recently have added support for Snowflake. And then we're looking at some AWS-specific technologies in the near future, as well as some others for Azure, which I'll show you. And then we support the move to cloud process. As you'll see, we don't actually move the bits, and we have partners that we work with that do that. We do everything around that process to help you actually make useful decisions. We provide the data to help you make sensible business decisions around this, as I'll talk about and as Mick will show you. So why do people choose Azure? So it's and if you're still thinking and you haven't chosen Azure for sure yet, this webinar is still valuable because the process you use is the same. We'll show it specifically for Azure, but it's similar for AWS and a little less similar for Google Cloud Platform. They don't have Databricks, for instance. But Azure's in the top two. They are what we call in tech world a fast follower. AWS did start the public cloud provider world, and Microsoft has taken everything that AWS has done, good or bad, pick the parts that work for them, and that's what they're going to do. So they are being a fast follower can actually be a very good thing. As you are likely to know if you work closely with Microsoft, Microsoft and the Azure team have a very strong services lineup, and it's especially strong for enterprise. People say that Azure is complex, but I think doing things in the cloud is complex. And enterprise, as with big data, is having a better time of figuring it all out and making it work. For medium-sized companies, can still be quite large by most standards, but not quite at that Fortune 2000 level. It can be a lot to take on. Of course, Azure has a large distribution footprint, fully worldwide, competitive pricing, service, and support. Lots of existing expertise, and this is a huge factor with Microsoft. No one ever got fired for buying Microsoft. There are many, many Microsoft shops out there. They provide a level of service, support, and assurance that just isn't really available anywhere else, and it's a good place to be. So Azure may be the best or even the only choice for existing Microsoft shops. It is said to be somewhat complex and somewhat pricey. The link that I have on the slide, you'll be able to get this. Oh, you will be able to get the slides and the recording after the webinar. I should have mentioned that up front. And this link will be there. And that's one of many articles that talks about the difference between the different cloud platforms if you're looking to decide. Also, as we go along, please feel free to type in questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So Gartner says that a data-driven approach for planning and migrating is critical to success. And Gartner says a lot of things. This one is among the more true ones that they say as far as we experience, and we've actually developed a lot of capability to help support a data-driven approach to planning and migrating. So for moving to cloud, the really big picture is there's big things that people like lawyers and corporate consultants worry about. You have to identify your opportunities. What's the gap analysis? What's wrong now? Why would you change what you've got? How are you going to deliver this? Designing, and it goes on. So there are a lot of very big picture steps. We're a level lower down than that. Basically, what we're talking about is the decision to move to cloud has been made, or at least strongly encouraged. We want to move to cloud. Let's see if it's worth doing. And that's where we help, because we can answer that question. So here are the steps you use to leave your data center for the cloud. I want to specify that this is done by workload. People talk about move to cloud like it's flicking an on-off switch. Very much not. You look at the workloads you've got, you decide which ones to move to cloud, you move them to cloud, you see how it goes, and then you repeat. Let me go through this really step by step, 10 steps. And you're going to see that there's a lot of dependencies among the steps, which can make these decisions very hard. And that's why Unravel adds a lot of value, is we really simplify that. So bear with me while I go through the steps. Identifying on-premise workloads that you're going to move to the cloud. You may know that going in, you may very well not. And even if you do think you know it going in, you're going to want to confirm it. And we're going to show you how we can help. You baseline the performance and resource use before moving. A lot of on-premises shops, of course, they've grown, many cases, the companies have grown by acquisition and put together different technologies, different workloads. You may not know for your current workloads, their performance, is it even acceptable for your business needs? Is it acceptable for what you're going to need going forward? What kind of resources does a given workload use? Many shops don't know, but you need to size that up before you move, because you need to be able to calculate the ROI on the move afterward. That's going to drive whether it's seen as a success and whether you decide to move more workloads. So you have to know the before, so you can do a before versus after comparison. And again, that's something that Unravel's a big help with. You can optimize the workloads before you move. If you're going to move to Databricks, for example, you're going to have to really look at your current workload, really understand it, kind of break it down, and decide which parts to put where on the new combined platform you're going to be moving to. Some things going into Databricks and some not. Then you have to match the services and components to the equivalents on Azure. And that's like that Databricks question I just asked. Or are you going to use HDInsights? More of a lift and shift. Then you've got to estimate the cost and performance of the workloads post-move. Now, if you're just starting to move to cloud, either in your division or in your whole company, that can be very tough to do. Lots of people end up hiring consultants to do this. It's expensive, and you're doing a lot of learning out of house. In other words, your consultants are learning. And then when the engagement is done, they're going to go on to the next one. You haven't learned anything in-house. So we recommend that you do quite a bit in-house, or we work with your consultants. And with Unravel, you can use the tool to help transfer some of that knowledge. You have to estimate the cost and schedule for the move. Well, again, these are all the starred things, or things that are specifically done in a specific way on Azure, different than if you're moving somewhere else. You always have to validate the success of the move. So you need the before as well as the after. optimize the workloads in the cloud, an ongoing process, usually a lot of work up front and then ongoing work afterwards. Manage the workloads in the cloud, which looks different on Azure. And then size up what you've done and go through the whole thing again, starting at step 1. So some details follow. And we're going to put the demo all in one place with Mick in about 15 minutes. So why on-premises and why cloud? No one asks why on-premises anymore, but it does have some advantages. There are reasons people use it, and there's reasons that people are still staying with it. So usually your on-premises setup is already there. Skilled staff are in place. It's easier, much easier to manage centrally. The sheep tend to run about without a shepherd in the cloud, not so much on-premises. There's a real comfort level with security. Furious arguments over whether security is better on-premises or in the cloud. People on-premises say, of course it's better on-premises. People in the cloud say, how can a given company provide the same level of security that a provider like AWS or Azure can when they have so many people to support? They can have much larger security staffs. And people continue to have security problems both on-premises and in the cloud. So somewhat of a religious debate. Our wars, I think, is the tag online, and we'll leave that to others. On-prem has lower operational costs often, much more expensive to set up, much harder to get things going, but once they're running, they can run fairly cheaply. There's an inherent cost control. If you only have so many servers and someone wants to add a potentially big job, you can tell them, yes, we'll support it, up to the point where it gets so big that you need more servers, and then you need to go justify that. So there's an inherent governance on cost and complexity on premises, and there's theoretically one location to manage many if you actually have many server farms. But still, there's a smaller number of discrete locations to manage. That number may be one. It may be number you can count on your fingers and toes. It's not going to be like the cloud where you can just go all over the world and have many sites supporting you at once fairly easily. So cloud positives are pretty much the logical complement of the on-premises positives. It's much easier to start projects in the cloud. You don't have to buy, set up, provision new servers. It's attractive to staff. The world is moving to cloud, as I mentioned. It's all happening this year during this, for the next 10 years, but it is happening. Less of a management burden. Many things are handled for you. World-class security, and Azure's very strong that way. There's still some advantages on premises, and there's some advantages in the cloud. Low capital costs, actually low to no capital costs. You don't have to spend money up front. You can try things and see how they work. But Sandeep says, they describe the cloud as pay as you go, and that sounds great when you're getting started. But once you get in there, he says once you go, you pay. And the bills can be quite high, even higher than on-premises. There is, of course, inherent scalability, far, far greater than on-premises. And the cloud is already globally distributed, whereas that's a tough row to hoe for a company if they feel they have to do that with their own internal resources. And underscoring all of this, I just described it as cloud hot, on-prem not. Move to cloud, working in the cloud technologies is very much seen as the wave of the future. Business statistics support that, and I'm sure your work and your lived experience talking to colleagues supports that too. And again, save any questions or write down any questions for Q&A. Move to cloud is a grand challenge for IT. So in the hard sciences, people tend to call something that no one solved before a grand challenge. And often it can take centuries, for instance, in mathematics to tackle Fermat's last theorem or something similar. Move to cloud is a grand challenge for IT. IT is a different world when it's all on premises than when it's mostly in the cloud, which is where we're moving to. And it's a huge deal, and many of the ships will sink on the way. A huge number of move to cloud projects fail. Not many of our customers' projects fail, and we're very proud of that. And then the promised ROI is often not realized by the business. The first problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that many times people don't know their ROI because they don't know what their costs were before they moved. So you've got to characterize that, and we can help. There are hidden costs in the new cloud world. Pay as you go sounds great, but there's no cap for costs. We've had people, including at least one person who works for us now, spend 6 figures in a weekend testing something, just testing it in the cloud. So you have to be very careful. And then bad cloud usage behavior among end users. When no one complains when you do something bad, like make super complex queries or store data that you don't really need, if people only assess their budgets quarterly or yearly, you don't see that behavior show up for a while, and you've spent a lot of money in the meantime, and you've gotten people depending on certain workloads that may not be what you want them to be. So those are some of the cost-related problems. And then performance, on shared infrastructure, you have noisy neighbors that can bump you off. Of course, you can pay for your own isolated servers, but that's more expensive. Resource locality, so cloud servers are someplace, and there is a lag to get from there to get data and code running, depending on where the customer is. And so a lot of work around getting the localization right. And then the previous architecture may be more performant than the new. So kind of summing that up. So we're going to go through the steps one at a time. And the nice thing about having these steps is that different people who have a bigger role at different parts of the process can look and they can agree where in the 10 steps you are, so that you can have sensible discussions where you talk about the same things. Someone can say this is really hard and they're rewriting code, and someone else says this is really hard and they're trying to get the budget right. They're both correct, it's really hard, but they're talking about very different problems. This list of steps helps you see where you're at in the process and talk about each step with the right people. So in order to identify on-premises workloads that you're going to move to cloud, you have to do something like this. List all your workloads from all your sources, and I've listed a few sources there. Identify the ones to move to SaaS, but you're only going to move them, So some of them you can move to software as a service. For instance, Salesforce might replace an on-premises CRM like Microsoft provides. And so if you make that move, or you can actually use Microsoft CRM as SaaS as well. So those different issues, you're not going to be running them in the same way. You still have to get the data right. Excuse a little side version, but I actually worked for a while for Marketo, which works with Salesforce. And the problem that Marketo had as a company, so many people had set up their Salesforce so badly that Marketo then did not work well off of their oddly customized and somewhat random data setups, and they couldn't change them because they had tons of data in them. They couldn't go back and move to a setup that made more sense for them. That's a problem with SaaS. So you still have data problems with SaaS. They're just different. You then agree the criteria for moving workloads to the cloud. And when an executive is just saying, make it so, about move to cloud, that can be a tricky conversation, but you got to do it. And then you use those criteria to stack rank the workloads by priority. The trouble is, if you've never moved any of your stuff to the cloud before, you may not yet know what technologies you're going to go on to, what they cost, what your workload is going to cost. That's where Unravel can help, as we'll see. So this is the chicken and egg problem. Which workloads to move, which cloud platform, and which technologies on a given platform. If you know which workloads, you can start work on the answers to those questions for those workloads. But if you don't know what workloads yet, you don't know what platform to use. So chicken and egg problem. And Unravel Data comes in and eats the egg and the chicken. We give you we characterize all your existing workloads, and we tell you how each of them would do in the cloud on different cloud platforms. So you can actually, at a fairly fell swoop, answer all of these questions and make business decisions with numbers and logic and serious conversations that are informed not on just gut feel or one person's previous experience that might not be relevant or a consultant's advice that may not be relevant. Unravel actually provides you the information you need to make serious business decisions. All right, I'm going to go through these next steps a little quicker, but setting up the problem is really getting people to understand and to discuss things at this level can often be the biggest organizational issue. So you characterize your on-premises setup so that you can nearly reproduce it in the cloud, and per workload, you identify resource usage, CPU, memory, what are the supporting elements in the software stack. People have huge issues around whether a given library element is at the same version on premises and in the stack, and there can be lots of cost involved just with that. What data tables are being used per workload? So, which you don't. If you're going to move a set of workloads, you want them to be the ones that use a given set of data tables. You identify your software targets for each cloud platform. If you've already decided on Azure, that's simpler. You're only focused there. Identify custom code that needs to be ported. I've been around cases where there were millions of lines of a variant of SQL that needed to be ported. You specify the adaptation work needed for the different versions of your software that are in the cloud. And you specify the adaptation work, for instance, as mentioned with Databricks. You're going to do a fair amount of work up front, but the results can be really good. So then, do you optimize first or lift and shift? We always, in tech, we love to make things work better. So of course you go in thinking you're going to optimize, and then you see the cost and time involved, and your bosses are saying, get this done this year. It might not be possible unless you do the quick and dirty approach and lift and shift. So that ends up happening a lot. You need to create your own decision process and work to reduce guesswork. Consider this carefully because it'll bite you. Actually, Unravel customers can hear a webinar that we did, and maybe if you talk to our sales team, you can get access to it, where Sandeep talks about the process they went through. And one decision that they made about how to store their data, they did not use Parquet files. And that cost them long term. It was a big deal, and they never were able to fix it, and it kept biting them for years after the move was made. But one medium-sized decision in the whole process. Then look at this eye chart, and I have a link to the blog post where this is put into context. So please read that blog post if you're really serious about moving to cloud soon. It's a huge help. We had a consultant come in and do that one for us. So what this shows is it characterizes the types of services under 5 big categories, the blue bars going horizontally. You capture data, you store it, you transform it, publish it, and consume it. Now, Unravel tends to work mostly in the transform part of the process. That's where most of the work gets done, that's where most of the expense is, and frankly, that's where most of the problems can come up. So these red rectangles show some things that we specifically support now and some things that we'll be looking to support in the future. The purple bars are specific for this discussion. So we're talking about the first column is what specific functionality are we talking about, like stream ingest or batch data processing. The middle purple area is just to isolate the Azure version of each of those. So if you're talking to someone whose experience is on AWS or Google Cloud Platform, now with this chart, you can know what the heck they're talking about and how it maps onto the Azure world and vice versa. Very valuable. Then there are open source software, Kafka and Spark are great examples of open source software that runs on all the platforms. And then, although there may be flavors, on each of them. And then there's third-party tools that run on some and not others. For instance, Databricks only used to run on Azure and has since also extended to AWS. So this is a great chart. If people just start spouting product names and saying, like, where does AWS batch fit in? I've used that before. This chart is really helpful for grounding those discussions, making them practical. So You then estimate cost and performance in the cloud. So this is something you can either do by hand or watch Mick. He makes it kind of magical with Unravel software. So you have to estimate the instance sizes, your CPU costs, your memory costs, your storage costs, your networking costs, software license costs, and other costs. For instance, people costs to run all this. You should need fewer people to run it in the cloud. You won't need 0 people to run it in the cloud. So you'll need to estimate that as well. And you'll organizationally, you'll learn more over time to make those decisions better with time. It's hard at first. You have to estimate the cost and schedule for the move, and that's very much a people thing. And are you talking about calendar time, you know, fractions of people's time, but it takes a while, or are you talking hours? Management time, crucial. I once read something really discouraging. The most precious resource in business is management attention. So you may have all the people and all the money that you need, but if management has too much going on and can't fit in the decision making and support that you need to get a different tool or to approve a budget, it's not going to happen. And of course, you have to see direct and indirect costs. For instance, you may have a team of 10 people, and on that team, you may need to have a couple more people, or you may have fewer people after the move. But how much so? You've got to figure all that stuff out, or at least get a good thumb on the wall for it. You then validate the success of the migration. How do you track which workloads you moved? Why didn't you move a given workload in the first tranche? And is it going to go in the second tranche? Someone's got to keep track of all of that. Things that will never move. What's the on-premises estate like? You can end up, you know, if you have an on-premises setup that you're not going to abandon, but it's supporting fewer and fewer applications, the relative cost of those applications is going up, right? The cost per app. If you move half your apps to the cloud, and you still have most of your on-premises costs, well, the things that are still on-premises have become very expensive. And what's the cloud estate look like? How's that getting managed? A few more steps. Once you're in the cloud, and Unravel does this, but we're not going to talk much about it today. We're really talking about the on-premises and migration to the cloud rather than life in the cloud. But you optimize each workload in the cloud, and if you optimized it before you moved it, you have to optimize it again after you moved it. You manage the workload in the cloud, learn the idiosyncrasies of how it works, and then you grab some more workloads and do it all over again. And we're getting close to the demo, but I want to talk about the comparison of automatic to manual. So basically, doing things in the cloud is more on automatic. There's a lot of things you don't do for yourself. They're done for you. Manually, that's on premises, and really, you know, driving a manual car, if you know how to do it, driving a stick is fun, but hardly anyone does it anymore because the automatic is cheaper, smoother, easier, less to worry about, safer, so many good things about it, but a little less hands-on, a little less direct, a little less control. All right, and now I'm going to turn over to Mick for the next section, our demo.
Awesome. I will grab the screen and share out here.
All right, thank you, Mick.
Should see an Unravel window. Is that coming through okay?
It certainly is. Thank you. Great.
Awesome. And as Floyd mentioned, we really do like to make these sessions interactive. So we have the chat mechanism to submit questions. Please submit those, and we'll get to those at the end and make sure we get you answers. And worst case scenario, we'll reach out to you afterwards and make sure you get a full understanding of what we were talking about here. So with the migrations to an Azure platform, there are a lot of questions that need to get answered, and these environments are very complex, as I'm sure we all know. But there's a couple different ways we can get that data. And that data about what you're doing with your big data environment is really critical to having a successful transition. And that transition is not so much an event as a process. And establishing that process for the first time is quite a lot of legwork. We find that customers, they think they've got a good idea of what's going on sometimes, but we haven't run into one yet who hasn't been surprised by some some of the data that gets uncovered during a migration. And for those who aren't using a tool like Unravel, they typically only find that that surprise after they've moved. And in the worst case scenario is your customer internally finds out that that surprise after the move when they're expecting their data to be where it is and it's not. And that's one of the big things that we want to avoid is any kind of negative surprises like that. Same with that that cost understanding of what is it going to be to get this workload moved to the cloud, and I want to have predictable numbers, because if I start moving things and we start, our spend starts getting out of control, there's going to be a lot of panic. Do we pull back? Is that the right thing? Do we need to optimize? And we're hoping to prevent that with the data we provide. So the first understanding that someone needs to have before moving into that cloud is kind of this discovery that's done automatically by Unravel. So understanding what components of the platform am I using, what services, and Floyd mentioned that oftentimes you'll see compatibility issues. So those are in another report here as well. But you'll need to make sure that I'm supported in the new platform, and if I need to do code rewrites, that I take care of those. So you'll need to know what are my operating systems am I running? How many hosts do I have? What kind of usage do I have, or what kind of capacity do I currently have on-prem? Do I know, my CPU and memory totals? So I need to know those to predict what I'm going to be spending in the cloud. So the next thing we need to understand is how are those resources being used? So, do I know which application types are we executing? Do I have Spark? Do I have MR? Am I using Tez? Am I using Kafka? After that, you'll need to know who's using that environment. So this could be broken down by, product IDs, user IDs, individual users, just depending on how your environments run things. And then there's further breakdowns potentially by, queues, for example, for all the yarn operations. Do I have specific queues dedicated to specific workloads? And, I need to have that understanding of, what does my usage look like for each of those queues. On the right-hand side, you'll see our usage, and how we signify usage in an environment is, CPU and memory. So, what I know about my on-prem environment is, usually just from the tools that the platforms provide on their own. So I want to have a good understanding of where I'm actually using things versus the capacity I have. And that's what you see here in this graph with the blue line and the red line being capacity, blue line being usage for both memory and CPU. So we need to have a good understanding there. In this example, at a quick glance, I can see that I've got a lot of excess capacity in this environment. And, I have to make the decision that when I go to that cloud provider, do I need to have that excess capacity? Or could I, cut that capacity down, and auto scale environments and save some costs there? Would that make more sense for me? Down below that, we have a heat map showing the CPU and memory usage as well. The darker intensity indicates more usage for that particular time frame, and we can drill down like anything on Unravel and get more detail on it and see, what my usage statistics are for each of those time frames. So this might indicate that I've got an application that's particularly bursty, let's say. And in that case, maybe an ephemeral resource would be the right kind of environment to move this to the cloud. So just another option for the kind of data that you need to understand about the environment before making, a decision of, where exactly am I moving into the new platform. So next, let's talk a little bit about the data. So the data is, crucially important to your move. And it's interesting working with as many clients as we do, because some of them do have, the thought that, hey, I'll just move everything and then I'll sort it out later, and I won't do it. And, I kind of liken that to, when you buy a new house and you move from your old house, you're not going to move your garbage. You're not going to move your things that you don't need. You're going to leave those behind, and, maybe you'll even downsize a little bit, get rid of some furniture that, you haven't used. And we have a notion in the product here of understanding, hot, cold, and warm, which I'll get into here in a minute. And we'll talk about, how that data can be used to make that decision. So I need to see, with my data, what's getting used, when is it getting used, and how much of it do I need to move over. So seeing that from an overview level is something that we provide. So understanding how many tables are getting created recently, do I have everything getting access. If I drill down onto that table level, we can really get more granular with the data, the metadata that we're collecting about the environment, and understand what are my hot tables, what needs to move to the new platform. So the definition of what hot, warm, and cold is configurable here as a policy, so you can pick what that means to you. And back to that, moving houses analogy, I learned a life lesson a few years ago that, if you're moving and you have a box that you didn't unpack from the last move, throw it away. You don't need what's in there because it hasn't been used. And, we see that every day with customers. We've got a large customer that's a credit card operator. And when they, we're looking at their data, they've got about 80,000 tables. They found out using Unravel that that about 30,000 of those hadn't been read in over 3 years. And so, that's not the kind of data you want to be moving to the cloud. And, immediately, right off the bat, they saw, huge opportunities for savings there, because, when you move into the cloud, not only is, all the CPU and memory cost you money, but the storage as well. So we need to make sure that, we're really only moving active things. And that's what the data analysis does here within the data insights piece in Unravel. And we can get even more granular down to the partition level. And, within the partitions, we can see which ones are most active. And then the critical piece to this is understanding who's using that data from an application perspective. And that's what you're seeing on this table level view here. So I've got, particular users that are using this data, and they need to be accounted for when I move that data or I move that app. So it's, sort of that chicken and egg thing. I don't want to move an app that doesn't have its data, and I don't want to move the data without moving all the apps that are using that. And so we give you all that information down to the granularity of the table level so that you can be prepared for that move and really have the insights you need to make that first part of that transition successful. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is, which workloads do I want to move, and how do I decide, what's going to make this move successful, from a move perspective. So we do a lot of gathering of data about your environment in Unravel, and for customers that don't have a product like Unravel, they have to do all of this manually and then make these kind of guesses on what's going on there. So in this view, we're seeing the applications broken down by several of the aspects that are already there. So we've got job type, so I could pick just Spark applications. I've got users, I've got queues, then I've also got application tags. And so application tags is a functionality where you can signify certain things. It might be a workflow, it might be a specific project, end customer, and say, hey, I just want to move, the platform team's data. I'm going to click off all and just pick platform team. And then I can generate the heat map view to see an understanding of, okay, when are they using data? And I can drill down on that and really understand exactly, what my profile is for that workload and what do I need to move it into that would make most sense. And so when we generate that report, we have lots of options. So, there's a lot of cloud providers out there, and we give you the opportunity to say, hey, what would this look like in an individual one? Focusing specifically on Azure, we've got, IaaS. So if you just want to do an instance there and run it, just like you did on-prem, you can do that. But if you want to move into one of the other, platforms as a service like HDInsights or Databricks, you can pick that as well. Additionally, you want to know, where's the best region to run this? I might have restrictions around where my data needs to be, so I might have to pick those regions as well. You see here all of the machine types available in that environment, and so I can pick and choose what I need, or I can pick everything. Maybe I, for some reason don't want a specific machine type. I can turn that off as well. You also have the capability here to assign a custom cost. Most of our customers are not paying the retail price for any of their instances, so this is kind of a critical understanding of what's my real cost going to be. You don't want to put, fake numbers out there and pass those up the chain when you're asked, how much are things going to cost. You want to have that real data as accurately as possible that really reflects what am I going to be spending, when I get to that cloud, because at the end of the day, we do want to prevent those surprises. So if I go look at the execution of this report, and in this example, I picked Databricks in the standard tier, central region. I picked all of the VM types. You can also decide whether I have a certain amount of object storage as well as locally attached storage. And then we get a readout here with a few options. So I can see I've got, at an SLA of, 100%, what would it cost me in this environment for this particular workload to be moved? And so in this case, we're looking at $212 an hour to maintain that workload, and at 100% capacity for what it's using today. So down below, we can see the machine types that it's recommending and what their individual costs are. Now, if I can take a little bit of an SLA hit here, that's what these other options are. So whether I can go down to 95 or 90, or if I can even drop down to 85%, I have the ability to capture some more savings. So I can drop that down to $200 an hour if I can withstand a 15% SLA compared to what I've got on-prem today. So depending on the particular workload I'm looking at, that may make sense or it may not make sense. That's kind of something that you'll need to decide within your environment on a per workload basis. But we give you the numbers to say, hey, here's what it could look like. We see dev environments getting moved. You probably don't need 100% SLA on those, but if you've got critical business functions, those are the ones you're going to want to move surely at 100%. We also have the ability here in this report to understand, would a auto scaling environment be the right thing for this particular workload? And that's what we're saying here is, what would the, having the capacity at all times versus, having the auto scaling, cost me. So I can see the VM cost over this period, and an auto scaling in this environment would drop that 212 down to 172. So there's a lot of times where capacity isn't getting used. And in the cloud, this is one of the things that you want to make sure you absolutely leverage, because, every used resource in the cloud is cost. And we've come from a world where you already sunk all the cost in the hardware on-prem, and you weren't really having to spend any additional costs based on usage, to moving to a world where now anybody who has access to the environment can spin up a new workload and start racking up a bill. And as Floyd mentioned, that one example where somebody could end up spending $100,000 in a weekend, that person probably doesn't have the signing authority to buy a pack of gum on behalf of the company. And now, everybody in the development environment has access to create applications that will, eat these kind of resources. And so that's something that we want to prevent. And we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that in the post-move section, which we'll get into here in a sec. So what happens after the move? So as I mentioned, the move is not an event, it's a process. And we want to make sure that we have, kept an eye on what's happening with an application down to the individual application level, but also at the workflow level. So understanding that application running over time, has it run slower? Has it consumed more resources? Because we all know full well that as soon as you make a change in the environment and somebody has an issue down the line with their application, the first thing they're going to do is point at that change and say, hey, your change broke my app. I need to go back. And you want to have the data ready so that, we can actually justify that. And, at the end of the day, you want to actually be monitoring the applications as well to make sure that you haven't caused a problem and that people aren't failing. And that's what Unravel, that's what our bread and butter is. That's what we've always done, is that kind of analysis on applications. And so when you get to the cloud, that becomes critical from a cost saving standpoint to understand down to the individual application level, how many resources are using and how could we be more efficient. And this is a Spark application executing in the environment. You can see right off the bat that we've got several recommendations for specific config parameters to reduce the resources that this particular application is allocating versus what it's using. We've got some efficiency notices here specifically for low memory utilization. So we're not in a stage here where, it's just one user and one application. It's every user and every application. So it's typically hundreds of users, thousands of applications, tens of thousands of applications every single day that, are contributing to the success of this move to the cloud. And, there's not a customer I've met yet who hasn't been surprised by that second month bill, before we get introduced, because, that usage is really unknown a lot in environments. And after they start getting everything moved, particularly if they've made the decision to lift and shift, that's something that they surely want to avoid. So within the application level, we provide that kind of analysis of what's going on with the individual applications. We show the actual resources that got used over time. So whether I want to drill into CPU or memory utilization, and I can also see the bottlenecks. So where is my application spending its time? What particular stage is consuming those resources? And is there something that I can do to address that? And that's a task that really does need to be looked at on-prem as well as in the cloud. And if you can address these things beforehand, as Floyd was talking about, we can get ahead of the transition to the cloud and make sure that we don't get into a state where we've overspent for no good reason. So it's really just all about understanding what do I have now, and what would this look like in the cloud. And then the last piece here is our whoops, let me go pop over there. Sorry, wrong bookmark. There we go. So our workflow understanding. So an application running over time, the comparison of a per instance run, which could be one or more applications, is something that's also critical. So I can see, if I go to my chart here, this application, failed a couple of times recently, but it had been running pretty good, and the last one was okay. So I can compare duration, I can compare IO usage, resource usage between those two executions, and still get as granular as I need to on any of those components underneath. So if I need to understand, why am I taking more time now, after a certain point of time, I can continue to validate that moving this application or this workflow to the cloud was the right thing to do. And regardless of which provider you're choosing, that's something that we all need to do, whether you've got a tool like Unravel. All right, well, that's the end of what I was showing for the demo. We'd love to get a full demo for anyone who'd like one. So just reach out to the marketing team here, and we'll get back to you. But Floyd, did we have any questions at this point?
Yes. A few things came up, and I'll share those now, and I'll take the first shot at the answer, and then Mick, have you add your voice to my comments. First of all, I found a resource, that I'm displaying now. It's just an article comparing different targets on Azure, but it's a good orientation to what some of the choices are, and they describe HDInsight as being closer to infrastructure as a service. So it looks more like what you've got on premises, whereas Databricks is more fully managed. And so it's more closer to the platform as a service model. So this article goes through the details in a useful way. First question is, who's happier about their moves? Users of AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform? And I think my experience is that we find that people pick a platform for various reasons. That Google is really popular with developers. They really like the simplicity of it, and they like the way things are done. It's really a developer-friendly platform. There are fewer services available on it, so there's less help. And developers often don't mind because they like to do it right, which means often doing it themselves. But there are fewer resources available. Azure users tend to be experienced Microsoft users. They're moving from Microsoft heavy environment on-prem to Microsoft in the cloud, and they tend to like that. And AWS is a bit more Wild West. There's a lot of services. There's so many, it's overwhelming. And if you go onto AWS, you become an AWS expert. Sorry, but whether you like it or not. And otherwise, you just drown in costs. So there's not a big difference between who's happier with what, and it's almost a kind of a cultural issue as to who goes where. Does that fit your experience, Mick?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the people who are the happiest are the ones that are spending the least in their cloud environment compared to what they expected to. You know, those that are unhappy are the ones that get those surprises where, you know, typically people who do a lift and shift and say, you know, I'm just going to put it in the cloud and then sort it out because I have, you know, our CTO said put it in the cloud, and then they get that bill the second month and they go, okay, we can't keep paying this. This is crazy. So. You know, getting that insight ahead of time to know, you know, what this is going to cost, you know, is crucial.
Yes, yes. Oh, and I wanted to take just a moment to describe at a bigger picture what Mick just showed you, because, you know, people's eyes get big when they see Unravel moving. They're like, I can know this, I can know this, I can know this. It's like the difference in a control panel between driving a car and flying an airplane. There's a ton more stuff that you have to see and do flying an airplane, but you actually should not have a car level of interface for your data estate on premises or in the cloud. It's not enough. You don't have enough information to do things right. People adjust on premises and then they go to move to the cloud and suddenly they realize how many things they don't know. And Unravel fills that gap, and it's a huge help. So what Mick showed you basically is that you can characterize with Unravel, you can characterize what you have on premises much quicker, easier, and more accurately. You can then choose and estimate the costs of your targets on different cloud platforms much quicker and more easily. Unravel helps you manage the process, and then it helps apply that same level of control in the cloud. And it's in the cloud that people really wake up to the fact that they need it. They actually, we think, always needed it. But in the cloud, when it costs money to not know these things, you suddenly get very glad to know them. So relatedly, do cloud migrations fail and why? And the answer is yes, they do. I studied information systems for a master's degree years ago, and a lot of the focus was on why different IT projects fail. Cloud migrations do fail, and so why do they fail? A lot of the issue is cost, and people don't really understand. Honestly, they often don't understand what's under the covers on premises, and it's only when they're paying for every little bit of it that it suddenly becomes an issue. Mick, do cloud migrations fail, and what are the reasons they do?
You know, they fail for several reasons. You know, not understanding what you have before you move, I think, would be the biggest one, and that's very common because, you know, there's lots of reasons that these environments are complex. I mean, the base technologies are complex. The organizations that put them into the current state they're in are often you know, have built over time, and so you've got, you know, people come in and out, you've got initiatives that come in and out, and so you've got various pieces across this entire landscape. And, you know, it's much more akin to picking up and moving an entire data center, right, like we did in the old days. You know, so it's really you need to know what's connected. You need to understand, you know, do I really need to move this? And you know, those kind of, you know, data about the data are things that, you know, need to be understood to prevent that.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. And there's a question: what do people who fail or succeed at this, you know, what's true of each group? And really, the level of thoughtfulness that it takes to reach out and look at a tool like ours is similar to the level of thoughtfulness and care that will help you be much more likely to succeed. Going in small batches rather than all at once, really looking at each of your workloads and what it's doing, taking the opportunity. It doesn't feel like it at the time, but this really is an opportunity to take a look at what you're doing. And as Mick mentioned, stop doing stupid stuff. Stop accumulating data that you're not using.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Floyd. You know, look at this as a journey, not a task. And I think that's you know, one thing you need to commit to, because, you know, move to the cloud isn't a thing, it's a process, and understanding that process is going to be ongoing with, you know, validation after you move, you know, is crucial to it. And as you mentioned, it's something that we all need to be doing for on-premises environments anyway, but most of us typically are not, you know, by default.
Right, and it forces a certain discipline. Hey, we're all living in Zoom and so on these days, so I'm going to finish on time, not go over, because the next thing's probably another meeting that starts at the top of the hour for a ton of you guys, or you have real lives to get back to if this is your off hours. So thank you guys all so much. You will get the recording and the slides, and we look forward to hearing back from a number of you in the future. Cheers, bye.